my origin story kind of starts in late 2016. I was part of the founding team of Maker, and sorry, now called Sky, right? Uh, but essentially back then, right, none of what we consider DeFi today really existed, right? So there were no DEXs, there were no lending protocols, there were no stablecoins, and so there was no infrastructure, right? So there were no oracles. So really, when uh, we had this vision, right, that there's going to be this decentralized kind of open finance, and at the centerpiece of all that they'll need a unit of account like a stable coin, and it was a pretty grand vision back then, right? Today it sounds like, oh yeah, obviously, duh, right? But back then
Right.
it was kind of crazy. But it required so much precursory things to be built that for the first year we weren't even building DAI. We were building like, oh well, DeFi is going to need a DEX, so we made
Right.
a DEX over a weekend. We made the first DEX on Ethereum. Oh well, we're going to need oracles for our stablecoin. Okay, so me and Mariano Conti, we built the first oracles on Ethereum, right? Back then, if you wanted to troubleshoot your Solidity code, you had no idea what was wrong with your smart contract. You would do a transaction, and Etherscan would say out of gas, and you would know something was wrong, but you would have no idea where the bug was or what line, or you would have no
Oh
context.
yeah.
So we had to make like the first Solidity debugger, right? And so it's all this kind of stuff that I think a lot of people today kind of just like take for granted. But like the OG like DeFi people, like we didn't have any of this. Like we really had to start from ground zero and really build it up piece by piece. And so now, fortunately, right, there's this, vibrant DeFi ecosystem, right? And there's tons of stable coins, there's tons of DEXs, there's tons of oracles, right? There's tons of lenders, right? And now, right, when someone proposes like some new primitive, right, it just seems like the next step, or it seems like a plus one, but it's not. I'm not seeing that like 0 to 1 kind of like the attempt to really create like that 0 to 1 kind of step change that
Right.
Peter Thiel often talks about. Fun fact, right? The first version of oracles that we wrote in Maker were written in Bash. And
Wow.
yeah, no, that's kind of the reaction I was expecting. Um, but and for the listeners that don't know, right, Bash is like this like really primitive kind of like I guess you would call it like a scripting language for when someone has like a command prompt or a terminal on, you like write like little scripts, and it's great for that, but it was never meant for writing like really advanced kind of complex applications. But the reason that we ended up writing the first version of the oracles and Maker in Bash was because we were trying to tie together all of these different tools that we had built. And the one thing that Bash was very good at was just gluing together a bunch of stuff. So, you would have like the module that, is fetching all of the, pricing data from all of the exchange APIs, right? And maybe that is written in Go or something, or maybe it's written in Python, right? Then
Right.
you have like the peer-to-peer kind of communication module, right? That's like talking between the different validators, right? And maybe that's, I don't know, written in JavaScript or Node.js, right? Whatever it is, right? Then you have, right, this other tool that's used to communicate with Ethereum, right? When you need to pull data from on chain, or when you need to push an Oracle update to a chain, right? And all of those libraries, right, are written, in this tool that was called like Seth, that was like also written in Bash, right? And so from that perspective, right, that was how we rationalized that decision, right? How do you glue all these different kind of like bits and pieces right together? And it's a great language for that. Today,
That's a very interesting choice. I gotta say,
today,
'cause
like,
it's
there's a single line of code in Chronicle now that's Bash anymore, right? But
right.
at the time, right, for prototyping, it was the right choice.
Right. It almost sounds like that was your data layer, in a sense, like getting all of these, different APIs and then compute and work with that data. I'm guessing in Bash.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And also, mad respect for writing assembly code. I don't think I've ever heard anyone saying that I wrote assembly code, which is really cool.
It's not a happy memory.
So obviously you moved from working with Maker to working on Chronicle, um, and I just want to understand from you what is like the main kind of drive behind Chronicle. What's his vision, and also like what is your involvement both from like a visionary perspective and also like a technical perspective as well.
It kind of came from what I was seeing happen in DeFi, right? We had we built up this enormous ecosystem of decentralized kind of financial products, right? And oracles were involved, at all these kind of different touch points, right? They were involved on the lending side, right? They were involved on the bridging side, on the cross chain communication side of things, to talk to different chains. They were involved with real world assets, to report on the reserve backing of different financial products, right? So they were kind of ever present. Um,
Hmm.
but at the same time, Oracle innovation had clearly started to lag behind DeFi innovation. Um, the space hadn't really changed all that much compared to the oracles that I'd worked on, like 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, at Maker, when we kind of really like invented that field. Um, and it became a bit worrisome seeing kind of how much oracles had kind of become the Achilles heel of DeFi, right? Um, if you look at a lot of the hacks that have happened in DeFi, not all, but for a very large some of them, right? The root cause is some kind of oracle manipulation, right? And when you kind of look at the market and see like the market share kind of like dominance by like a single player, um, it's quite concerning, right? Because it means that DeFi, as much as it has managed to like um, put itself outside of the box of the traditional financial system to kind of insulate itself from those systemic risks, has kind of very organically created its own systemic risks. And so that was really like the motivator for Chronicle, is how do we go back to kind of ground zero and really build up a new oracle that solves a lot of these challenges that we're kind of seeing in the ecosystem today.
Right. And that's very interesting that you've mentioned that a lot of or a big proportion of the hacks or exploits that are happening in DeFi are because of some kind of oracle manipulation. I think maybe what would be the best way to explain what an oracle is, and also what is the failure point of an oracle, generally speaking.
Absolutely. So I think the simplest way to explain what an oracle is, and what an oracle does is to take your cell phone and put it on airplane mode. And now, consider how useless your phone has become, right? And it is the ability of the applications on your phone to send and receive kind of external information, external stimuli from outside of the sandbox of your phone that gives applications this rich utility that we're used to, that we enjoy. And so to bring this, back to crypto, imagine blockchain networks as your phone, right? The blockchain network is the sandbox. It is the black box, and crypto applications have no omnipotence. They have no kind of visibility of what's happening external to the chain. And so oracles are really this mechanism to solve that problem, right? How do we bring this external stimuli, this external information from outside of the chain onto the chain? But what makes it a little bit of a more challenging problem to solve, what makes this non trivial, is that you don't want to rely on whoever is kind of providing this information, right? You don't want to have to trust them that they won't manipulate the data in any way. And you don't want to have to trust them that they might, censor the data at some point in the future, right? So you really want these data integrity and data availability type of guarantees. And so that is kind of what makes the Oracle problem kind of like a fun, interesting, like challenging problem.
It's super fascinating. So, in a way, then, would it be accurate to say that an oracle is like an API layer for the blockchain? It connects the blockchain or a chain with external data.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct in that. I would take it one step further and say that oracles act as the interoperability layer between on-chain and off-chain.
Okay, so added functionality, I guess, on top of just data in and out. Just you can also do stuff with it. I'm guessing you can prompt the smart contract to do something with a certain once the certain data is fetched, or some kind of logic that can happen there.
Exactly. Yeah. I think when we talk about data in an abstract sense, right, people are like, "Oh yeah, data, great," right? But like, what are like oracles actually being used for? I think the most common examples in DeFi are when you are saying taking out a loan, or when you're doing anything with leverage in DeFi, right? The DeFi protocol needs to kind of be aware of, what is the value of your collateral, right? And what is the value of versus what is the value of what you borrow. If at any point, right, the value of your collateral, starts getting really close to the value of what you borrowed, right, then that's when you get liquidated, right? And as a user, you probably think of that as a very negative thing, right? But as a protocol, right, this is a immune response, right? This is what a protocol does to ensure its kind of solvency, right? And so, really, the entire ability of the protocol to protect itself and to stay solvent is really dependent on this oracle, one being accurate, two being low latency, right, and not being able to be manipulated, right? And because if it is manipulated, right, that's when you see a hack, right? That's when you see a protocol getting drained, right? um, Another example could be when you use a bridge, right? People don't call them oracles, right? They call them bridges. But this is a bridge is just kind of like a white labeled term. What's happening underneath the hood is that let's say you're going from Ethereum to Optimism, right? What the bridge is doing is there's an oracle that attests to seeing this kind of event on Ethereum, and it will attest, and those attestation signatures can then be used on the smart contract on the Optimism side, right, to prove that, hey, I've bridge these funds on Ethereum, please release them to me on Optimism, right? Same thing with cross-chain communication, right? I think the most obvious example here is when you have this kind of like hub and spoke type of model for a protocol. So if you have some kind of DeFi protocol like cross deployed across a bunch of different chains, right? You have it on Arbitrum, on Optimism, on zk Sync, on Starknet, on Linea, right? Whatever it is, on Scroll. But you don't want to have governance on every single one of those chains, right? Where then the token holders need to then migrate, their tokens to each chain and then vote on that chain, right? That's not a scalable form of doing governance, right? So typically what happens is that protocols will kind of choose one chain that's like their hub, that's where governance happens. And then you can use oracles as cross-chain communication to kind of send messages across chains, hey, there was a vote, it happened on the hub, it approved changes X, Y, and Z, and use those Oracle attested to changes on the other chains to in a kind of in effect do all those changes as if the governance vote had happened on that specific chain. So the use case is pretty
Right.
diverse, right, and kind of constantly growing every day, right? I think when we saw NFTs, right? There were, you would mint a random NFT. Well, the randomization of which NFT you got, came from an oracle that was, giving you a provable random number.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting, and super interesting distinction between using oracles to fetch external data and using oracles to confirm activities or transactions happening, communication happening between chains. Um, and actually, something interesting here. Do you think that cross-chain oracles will continue to exist, or do you think that they'll be phased out by a more secure protocol or something closer to IBC that doesn't rely on a third party to do this checking process?
Um, I mean, I'm a big proponent of the multi-chain thesis. I don't, think we're all just gonna, transact on a single chain. And furthermore, I think that the way that um, you get more people to use uh, crypto applications is to not have them realize that they're even using crypto, right? That's how you make kind of crypto usage ubiquitous in society. Is in that you kind of abstract away a lot of the UX, right? Where in the end, people won't even know what chain they're actually using, right? To them, it's just the app on their phone, and the back end of that app just happens to be, on a chain or on multiple chains. So in that sense, yeah, right. Cross chain communication is very much here to stay. Um, I don't think um, it's quite as consolidated as you make it out to be. I think that if you look at
Mhm.
kind of like a timeline of market share of even things like DEXs or bridges or even like DeFi, like lending protocols, stable coins. There there is some entrenchment over time, but I think there's much more fluidity and kind of market share and opportunities, for new players to kind of pop up and bring some new utility while everyone else plays catch up. So I definitely think there's like a rich kind of like opportunity here, right? In every category, right? No one is safe, right? No one in DeFi feels like they can just like rest on their hands and just coast.
I just wanted to go back for a moment to oracles and talk a little bit about the different components of an oracle, and specifically about when it comes to Chronicle, the off-chain and on-chain aspects of an oracle. Um, do you want to maybe break it down a bit? Like, what does Chronicle do off-chain and what it does on-chain, and how do these two things match up?
Um, yeah, I mean, off chain is really just the discovery of data, right? So sourcing data from all of the different sources, and those sources can be on chain. They can be DEXs, they can be off chain. Those sources can be from you know uh, some kind of like land registry, right? They can come from some kind of stock exchange, right? Whatever, some kind of data aggregator, right? So there's this aggregation, this discovery of information, the aggregation of information. A validator will plug it into a model, and then the output of that model is signed by the validator with a cryptographic signature. And so then what kind of happens, and this is actually another property that I think makes Chronicle very unique, is what most Oracle providers will do is if they have 10 validators, they will just have 10 different cryptographic signatures, and they will, when they update the Oracle, they need to, one, push all of these 10 cryptographic signatures to the Oracle smart contract, and then the smart contract needs to verify all 10 of these cryptographic signatures. And this is a problem because it's one, it's a lot of data, and two, the signatures are very expensive to verify. And so, um, it kind of cripples the Oracle in a way where, because the Oracle is expensive to update, the Oracle just isn't updated that frequently. And so it's the way you can think of an Oracle not updating frequently is it's just not a very performant Oracle, right? So maybe if the price of Bitcoin moves 0.5%, the Oracle doesn't react to that because it's too expensive to update the Oracle every time the price moves 0.5%. So maybe the Oracle
Right,
only updates when Bitcoin moves 1%, right?
right,
So what we do differently is that the validators actually collaborate to generate a single signature. So this is called a Schnorr signature, and it's actually used in Bitcoin. But the real innovation here, right, is that you get away from this one-to-one relationship of validators to signatures, and you instead have this many-to-one relationship of validators to
right.
signatures. And so um, when you only have to push one signature on chain, that's very cheap. And when you only have to verify one signature, that's very cheap. And because it's so cheap, you can update the Oracle much, much more frequently. And so now you actually have a much, much more performant Oracle. So the other thing that enables is that you can have many more validators than you can in this like single signature model. Because what tends to happen in the single signature model is when each validator is cranking out its own signatures, is that you start limiting the amount of validators that you use in your Oracle to keep the costs low. Um, and I mean, this is just not a good architecture, right? Why would you cripple your Oracle with less security just to keep the costs low? So what Shore signatures allow you to do is to have as many validators as you want, right? And so more validators means it's much harder, uh, much more difficult, right, to kind of coordinate an Oracle attack, between all of these different validators, right? So instead of having 10 validators, you can have 100, 1,000, 10,000 validators. But they're all still collaborating just to generate this one signature. And so this one signature is still extremely cheap to verify and use to update the Oracle. So it's really just an Oracle that is, one, much more secure, but two, much cheaper, and therefore much more performant as well. So it kind of just checks all of the boxes.
Yeah, that's super cool. So then when you say that typically when you run one signature per validator and when you don't use that kind of that protocol, it becomes expensive, or computationally expensive, um, who are we talking about here? Since I'm guessing Chronicle doesn't have a lot of overhead, right? You're giving away, you're allowing validators to process, to compute all this data. So who would actually, foot the bill at the end of the day?
So I mean, essentially, oracles run as a service, right? So if you want to use an oracle, right, typically you go to an oracle provider and you have to pay them a certain amount of money per month. The dominant costs there, usually being the gas cost, right? Of what is it actually costing, right, to push these updates on chain? And I think what you find is that, well, if the Oracle is much cheaper to update, then the cost of the Oracle can also be much lower. So you end up with Chronicle, you end up having like a much more affordable Oracle that is also much more performant because it can update much more frequently for a much lower amount of money.
Wow. That's really cool. So how come isn't everyone doing this? It's obviously the much better choice of going about it.
Well, I'd say we're growing quite a bit, right? And we're backing some of the biggest protocols in all of DeFi, right? In terms of TVL, we are the second largest Oracle, just behind Chainlink, right? We are the Oracle for MakerDAO. We're the Oracle for Spark Protocol. We're the Oracle for many of the markets on Morpho. Um, and we've recently started kind of going aggressively into the RWA market as well, which we kind of think has enormous potential to even eclipse the TVL of DeFi within the next 12 months.
So not only you're currently second to Chainlink, but you're it's also considerably cheaper to run Chronicle compared to Chainlink, right? Because of what you just explained.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's super cool, man. That's super cool. So, what are your plans, I'm guessing, for the next 1 to 2 years in terms of new innovations, features, partnerships? Like, where do you see Chronicle being anywhere between 1 to 2 years from now? And is there anything that you're particularly excited to share or tease at the current moment?
So I think the most exciting um, the most exciting thing happening in crypto right now is the introduction of RWAs. I think we've seen kind of relatively steady growth of DeFi over the last few years. But DeFi really needs a catalyst to go from billions to trillions in TVL. And in order to make that next step, what does DeFi need? Well, it needs the introduction of a large amount of high quality collateral, right? It cannot be held back by, okay, BTC has this market cap, and the percentage of BTC that are used in DeFi is Y, and therefore, and ETH has this other market cap, and the percentage of ETH floating around on chain is Z, and the sum of those, right, is like the maximum scale of DeFi, right? Um,
Right.
that is way too constrictive, right? And so, what the introduction of real world assets allows you to do is to really tap into uh, these, huge traditional financial markets, right? Where there's actually tens of trillions of dollars of assets that are just sitting there waiting to get utilized. Um, and similarly, crypto can, provide credit. I think right now you have a lot of kind of stablecoin liquidity looking to earn yield, and so it's no surprise that one of the first um, financial products on the RWA side that caught a lot of traction was kind of tokenized treasury bills, right? Because finally there was this yield that you could get with your stable coins or your dollars, right? That wasn't coming from this boom bust cycle of leverage, right? Um, you know, when you get yield in DeFi, where do you think the yield is coming from, right? The yield is coming from another person who is borrowing, and typically they are borrowing because they want leverage, right? They're speculating that crypto markets will go up and they'll make a profit. right? And so when we are in a bull market, right, yields are very, very high. But when we're in a bear market, yields can be very, very low. And so the introduction of tokenized treasury bills in the form of RWAs really allowed this accessibility to sustainable yield at a huge scale, right? And those are kind of like the three kind of properties that are extremely important, right? Like in particular, like take credit protocol like Maker that has billions of dollars on its balance sheet, right? Um, it can't go in the latest yield farm, right? One, it's too risky, but two, as soon as it tries to move, anything more than 20, 30, 40 million, right? The yield just gets diluted too much, right? So um, once you reach a certain level of scale, um, it's not just the sustainability of the yield, but really the scalability of the yield. And that's where kind of the increase in monetary policy rates, right, were kind of like the perfect storm for kind of RWAs to like burst on the scene and really show organic utility in the form of treasury bill yield.
Right. That's super cool. When do you think that would happen? Is it already happening?
Oh, it's absolutely already happening. So actually, we just launched our RWA Oracle last week.
Oh, wow.
Uh,
Congrats.
yep. So essentially, the problem that you need to solve with an RWA is that it's not a crypto native asset, right? So, what do I mean by that, right? ETH is a crypto native asset. Everyone can every ETH is like fungible with every other ETH. If you have ETH in a wallet, you don't need to worry about the ETH getting stolen out of that wallet, right? It's just there. Um, you know how much ETH is in circulation, right? So all information that you kind of need about this crypto native asset is already available on chain. With RWAs, you don't have this, right? And so bringing like actually just tokenizing the RWA, that's the easy part. But once the RWA is on chain and you want to integrate it into a DeFi protocol, um, that's much more difficult because the DeFi protocol wants to treat the RWA like a DeFi native asset, like a crypto native asset, where it can, get all of the information it needs, but it has none of it. And so that's where really oracles kind of step in to fill that void, right? And really give DeFi protocols all the information they need around an RWA to let them pretend that that asset is crypto native. So using a tokenized treasury bill as an example, right? What do you need to know about this treasury bill? Well, one, you probably want to know, when was it purchased, right? Every treasury bill has a term before it matures, right? So, okay, so when was this treasury bill purchased? What is the term, right? What is the yield that it's generating? When is it, on what date is it going to mature? And when you're then talking about a portfolio of treasury bills, right? Well, you're probably not going to have 100% of the portfolio in the exact same kind of treasury bill, right? You'll probably have some that you bought this month, some that you bought the month before, maybe some that you bought 2 months before that. And now the distribution of when these treasury bills mature matters. Why does it matter? Well, remember what happened to Silicon Valley Bank, right? There was a bank run on Silicon Valley Bank, and people were trying to pull all their money out. And banks actually keep a very low amount of cash on
Yeah.
hand, and so
They operate on a fractional reserve around 1 to 10 or something like that. If maybe it's even more
exactly.
than that now.
So
Yes.
they had to liquidate their treasury bill reserves, and they had to liquidate them at a loss, right? Because if they're not mature yet, then someone else has to take the liquidity risk of waiting until that treasury bill matures to be able to get the money out. And so, right, the problem that Silicon Valley Bank had was not an asset problem. It had enough assets, right, to cover, in reserve, right, to cover its outstanding liabilities. The problem that Silicon Valley Bank had was a maturity mismatch, right, where it had short-term liabilities, right, of people wanting to take money out now, but it had long-term kind of like assets that wouldn't mature until some farther date into the future, right? And that's what ultimately required it to be saved, right? And so these are the same type of considerations that a DeFi protocol might need to do, right? Where if the DeFi protocol wants to recall, 20% of the credit that it distributed, that, RWA be able to handle that, right? Without um, presenting any kind of like solvency issues, right? With respect to the health of the credit line. And so this is, where it really almost becomes a requirement to have an RWA oracle when you're a DeFi protocol trying to integrate a tokenized real world asset. And it's a really kind of immature space. I think we're the only Oracle protocol to really have this type of product. Um, and I want to emphasize, how unique this product is, because we're not going to an asset issuer and being like, tell us all the information about your RWA, and we'll put it on chain, because that's not secure. The reason why that's not secure is because the asset issuer has a moral hazard, right? And the moral hazard is that they can just lie, right? And it's in their interest to lie. Um, because if they say, yeah, 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 right, it's fully backed, right? The treasury bills are worth, 1.5 billion, and that's why we minted, 1.4 billion on chain, and trust us, bro, it's all good, right? No, we don't do that, right? We go directly to the custodian where the assets are actually held, and we have direct access to the accounts at the custodian on behalf of the issuer. So we can really be an independent third party arbiter that is really attesting to what is actually held in custody at the custodian to really provide that firm on chain guarantee um, that is independent, from the moral hazard issues that the issuer has.
Right. Wow. That's cool. Is that is that something that is available globally, or are there any geographical restrictions based on current law or regulations anywhere?
So I think crypto regulatory policy is still evolving, right? In every jurisdiction, right? And it's always going to be the case that innovation kind of outpaces regulation. But there's, I think, encouraging signs in a number of the major financial districts in the world, right? So if you look at New York, if you look at London, Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Zurich, these are kind of the leading financial hubs in the world, and they're all trying to create kind of favorable regulatory frameworks around being able to do this because they all see the potential. Um, I think Germany is kind of leading the pack here. Um, so the our kind of first RWA integration was with a protocol called M0, um, who I think has a very interesting take on stablecoin. So what M0 does, the way you can think about M0 is it's kind of a cross between Circle and MakerDAO. And it kind of takes the best elements of each and says, okay, I fixed the problems with both of you. So the problem with, for example, if you're Circle issuing USDC, is that Circle is a centralized issuer, right? And as a centralized issuer, right, they can mint new USDC and they can burn your USDC, right? And you essentially have to trust Circle. It's a great product. I use USDC. I love it. But that's one of the weaknesses of that type of model. On the other side, you have Maker, which is much more decentralized. Um, it's a decentralized issuer, not a centralized issuer. But the problem is, right, that Maker is not as scalable, um, and it's not necessarily yield bearing if you are a kind of stable coin generator, right? If you are locking up ETH to borrow DAI, you have to pay Maker some kind of borrow rate, right? Um, so where M0 is somewhere kind of in the middle, right? So M0 is a decentralized protocol, but unlike Maker, it doesn't just have access to exclusively crypto collateral. It has access to kind of the entire traditional financial market kind of suite of assets. And so, for example, someone who wants to mint M stablecoins can go to a custodian, they create an account, and they will lock up some kind of financial asset. So let's use treasury bills as an example. They can lock up their treasury bills. They're earning yield on those treasury bills, right? Because they're constantly maturing every second, right? Earning more yield. And then they can borrow, right, M stable coins against those treasury bills that they're holding at the custodian, right? And they, in order to get their assets back, right, they have to then burn the stable coins on chain in order to release kind of their encumbered assets. And at the middle of all that is the Chronicle RWA Oracle. So we're the ones that are uh, get visibility into the custodian and have like access, like read access to all of the accounts. And so when someone wants to mint M stablecoins, they say, "Hey, I want to mint 10,000 stablecoins." We go, "Great, let's take a look at your account." Okay, there's more than 10,000, worth of treasury bills in your account. We validate this mint, and so now the user can go and use that validated mint signature to go and mint their stablecoins through the M0 protocol, right? So it's a
Right.
decentralized issuer, right? It's a completely independent oracle that's actually validating the underlying assets in real time. Um, but it's a much more scalable stablecoin model because it has access to all of these traditional financial market assets as collateral.
Wow. And you said they're based in Germany. They're
Yep.
are they? Yeah.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I think it's a decentralized financial protocol, so it's actually distributed, right? And they're not based anywhere. But in this
I mean, incorporated in Germany.
in
The
this case,
entity.
the custodian is based in Germany. So I think it's commendable what the Germans have really done on the regulatory side, right, to make something like this possible. And I think it can be used as a great case study, right, to be able to scale
Yeah.
this to other jurisdictions, right? Like I said earlier, in the US and in the UK, in a lot of those Asian markets like Singapore and Hong Kong. I think it's going to happen relatively quickly. Um, I would say 6 months at the latest.
Yeah. Oh no, and it's really fascinating, and it's interesting you say Germany because if you're familiar with Christoph Jensch, I'm probably butchered his last name, but he's the author of the DAO, and he's created a company recently called Tokenized.it. They're based in Germany, and they're what they're doing. They're tokenizing shares within a company, like GmbH companies, which is the equivalent of limited companies. They're doing that in Germany, and in Germany, you can tokenize a company's shares so long as I think the total value of the shares is under 8 million. If it's under 8 million, you're free to do it, right? And I think it's probably one of the only European countries where you can do that. You can't do it anywhere else in Europe at the current time. That's why it had to be Germany. And it's really interesting to see that Germany does allow for that framework to happen, and I'm really looking forward for other countries to start opening up to these possibilities, like tokenizing real world assets. For sure, huge thing for the future.
Absolutely. Like I said, RWAs are really what is going to notch up the scale of DeFi from billions to trillions. And
Yeah.
I think Chronicle is really kind of setting the standard for um, doing this the right way. Because uh, if we scale DeFi, in the wrong way, if we lose kind of this core crypto ethos of transparency and decentralization, then what are we really doing here, right? And there's no reason why we can't do both, right? So let's bring RWAs on board, um, but let's have transparent and independent oracles like Chronicle, kind of setting the standard for okay, we can do this, but we can do this in a safe, scalable, and sustainable kind of manner.
Yeah, honestly, and hats off to you guys for just trailblazing through that. I think it's fantastic to see companies doing this and really pushing adoption and just bringing crypto to the use cases that it always was meant to have. When do you think someone that's completely new to crypto can come in and have a great experience without having to go down the rabbit hole for 2 years?
I mean, I think we're already starting to see that today. Um, there is um, when you look at kind of the distribution of the funnel into crypto, right? The first step is usually that you go sign up on an exchange, right? Maybe it's Coinbase, maybe it's Binance, right? It's Kraken, it's OKX, whatever it is, right? And then what you kind of saw is those exchanges started to make wallets, right? So, almost every exchange has their own wallet, right? And so that's how you can now, start bringing for an exchange to bring their users, on chain, right? Then you started seeing exchanges making their own chains, right? So you're seeing this with Coinbase, with Base. OKX is creating their own L2. Kraken's creating their own L2. Binance, right, has had a Binance Smart Chain for quite a while, right, and it has a lot of activity. I actually think it's relative to the amount of activity it has, like it's actually not given enough credit. Um,
Yeah,
and
I
and
agree.
and those types of funnels are extremely powerful, right? Because it really um, you can really start getting like this kind of like closed loop, right? From hey, Binance user, transfer some of your Binance deposit to your Binance mobile wallet, and then you can use this application, on Binance Smart Chain to go mint your, I don't know, NFT or do some kind of like DeFi action, right? Take out a loan, right? And this is a closed loop type of system, right? And it's really just a UX problem of extracting away that complexity, right? And so there's no more hard technology problems here to solve, right? And so I think it's going to be rather surprising actually how quickly this happens.
That's an interesting point. But I guess the simplicity of it is always easier to iterate over something that's centralized rather than decentralized protocol. I feel like that's where it's getting a little bit more complex. It's how do you maintain decentralization, either over a chain or a protocol,
Sure.
and still give the user the same experience as a centralized service or as close as possible.
Absolutely, right. But I think using Base as an example, right? Base is an L2 that's secured by Ethereum, and contrary to most things in crypto, which um, tends to have a first mover type of hierarchy, right? Where we kind of saw this with Arbitrum, right, where they were the first L2 to launch, And for a long time, right, Arbitrum was just the biggest L2. And now you see that with Base, right, not only have they managed to catch up, but they've actually been able to like leapfrog, even though they were one of the um, even though they were one of the much later L2s to launch, right? And so I think it really proves out that this funnel of being able to, for the exchanges being able to convert, their exchange users into chain users, that flywheel effect is incredibly powerful.
Right. That's a very good point, actually. Yeah. I wouldn't have thought that exchanges are a gateway to decentralization, but yeah, 100%. It's definitely getting there, and it's definitely, and not only an easy way, but an efficient way as well to convert users to get them into the decentralized space, which is really cool. Um, so then moving away from that a bit, I just wanted to touch again on the challenges, right, of creating an oracle,
Mhm.
and the pitfalls of it, right? Um, when an attacker, let's say, is looking for a vector towards like manipulating some like protocol data of an oracle, like how would an attacker, what would be one of the most common vectors of attack for an oracle? Obviously they would have to have access to the data that it's pulling from, or to the middleware that checks whether that data is valid or not.
So it's quite diverse in that respect, and so I don't want to dive into it too much. I think I'll just leave it at that. Each oracle is built extremely differently, and with varying degrees of security and checks and balances and decentralization, right? And so it is incredibly important when choosing an oracle, um, to do kind of extreme due diligence into how does your chosen oracle that you're considering actually work, and what guarantees are you getting, right? And what are the different, like if you map out like a matrix, what are the different behaviors under different types of stressors, right? And what you'll find, right, like the reason that this is also important is because your decentralized finance protocol is only as decentralized as its oracle. You can have the completely most decentralized DeFi protocol in the world, but if your oracle is centralized, guess what? This protocol is now centralized as well, right? If there's a and I think there's kind of two flavors here, right? There's actually more, but I think you can bucket them into two kind of flavors. And so one is an oracle that achieves some distributed consensus, right? And what this essentially means, right, is that there's a bunch of validators here, right? And each validator kind of individually attests to some piece of data. And once you have some kind of super majority of the number of validators attesting to something, right, now that piece of Oracle data is considered to be, to have quorum, right? It's considered to be secure. Um, Now, there's one caveat here, which is not all validators are created equal. And if someone is just running their own validators or just running all of the validators, this is not distributed consensus, right? This is just an oracle that is Sybil, right? That is it's all the same person, right? So that they're not getting any value out of that distributed consensus. But I digress, right? And so, in the second bucket, right, is these
No, no, I
oracle.
think that's a good distinction because a lot of people, sorry, just to highlight what you just said, the difference between decentralized and distributed, that's very important, because decentralized means that anyone can run a node, even though 80% is just this one company running all of the nodes. Distributed means that it's an equal number of nodes shared across each party, so it's a lot more, I guess,
Yeah,
verifiably fair.
right, and even the quality of the validators matters, right? who are these validators, right? Who are these people? Who are these entities, companies, right? Who are these actors? Because if it's just a random group of people, right, why should you trust this oracle, right? And this is the kind of due diligence that we really is surprisingly uncommon in DeFi. Um, right? There tends to be this trend of like, oh well, so and so uses this, so it's probably fine, right? This is kind of like the step of like next step of maturity and risk management that I think we kind of need to make in DeFi, right? Is to really pick things apart, right? Be critical about them, right? And really analyze them. But going back to my previous point, right, on the two flavors of oracles, right? So there's these oracles that achieve consensus through validators, and then there's these oracles that just say like, no, I'm just telling you what the data is, and I'm just delivering you the data, and like here you go, right? Um, the latter is, it should be clear, is very inferior, right? You have zero guarantees that this Oracle provider is giving you correct data or will, censor you at some point. If that provider, Oracle provider, were to have a malicious employee who's upset, maybe they were let go, or maybe this Oracle provider was to get hacked, right? Um, you feel the downstream effects of that by using that Oracle provider, right? So it is incredibly important, right, that you choose an Oracle that has a robust, resilient distributed consensus of highly reputable validators. And without getting too shilly, I think that's something that really sets Chronicle apart. Is we have hands down the highest quality validators of any Oracle provider in the space. We have projects like MakerDAO, Etherscan, Infura, Gitcoin, even Gnosis. And so the idea of our validator strategy really is to let us get all of the really highly reputable projects in the space to run a validator for Chronicle oracles, such that the only way, for the oracle to ever be hacked is if all of these validators were to essentially commit cannibalism, right? It
Right.
would it would be like a snake eating its own tail, right? And if you have a very small group of validators, right, that might be possible. But our goal is really to just get like the top 100 validators in like the top most 100 like reputable entities, right, in the space that have kind of earned the trust of users already, right? So if you're using a Chronicle Oracle, right, you probably have maybe you've used DAI, right? So you have some kind of trust already in the maker team, or maybe you've been using a Gnosis safe, right? So you have some kind of trust in the Gnosis team, right? You've probably been using Etherscan since like your first transaction that you've ever made, right? So these are teams where a user will have already really built up a kind of social layer level of trust and reputation, and those teams are not likely to, or I would say are highly unlikely to come together, right, and really ruin their reputation in this industry.
Yeah, and that's a very clever way of going about it. I was actually meant to ask you about this because I noticed that you have all these like reputable companies as validators. So I'm guessing you're quite strict with who can become a validator, essentially.
Absolutely. I would say, um, without trying to sound offensive, we reject like 90% of people who approach us to become a validator. Um, it is a very important role, right? And it requires really high reputation, high integrity actors. And if you were to add anyone who doesn't have that reputation, right, it actually makes the oracle worse, right? Because the average amount of reputation, right, the average amount of security has actually gone down.
Yeah, no, completely. I completely understand it, and I don't think it's offensive at all. I think it's just it's obviously in the interest of the protocol to watch out for the integrity of the validators, and I'm sure that everyone in the space would agree with this. Um,
Yeah.
so then, in terms of the validators that you do work with, obviously you get a lot of value by getting these reputable companies, to validate protocol actions. What do they get in return out of this, out of your partnership?
So, having been in the space for this long, right, there's an incredibly um, large number of people who are very ideologically aligned with what what crypto can mean for the world if done right. As well as there are people who are very short term minded and are just here, to make a quick buck or something. But for those long term players, playing long term games, they're all quite visionaries, and they all really want to move the space forward, and they all kind of see the same problems that we do, right, with the space, where oracles are not transparent, right, where oracles are not decentralized, where oracles are too expensive, right, for the average upstart protocol to be able to afford, right, or the oracles are not that resilient, right, when you have like a really um, dramatic day like Black Thursday, right, the oracles, they don't update, they stop updating, right, and this is the critical moment where you need your oracle to work. um, and so really, I think we've just managed to amass like this, you know, really great group of people, right, who all just really want to move the space forward, and are happy to just, be able to be a part of that. And that to me is actually quite beautiful.
Yeah. No, that is fantastic. I feel like that this is one of the unique characteristics of this space is that people that are really into it, like they're really into the space. They're really into the tech. And I love that because that's what Bitcoin like that was the reason for Bitcoin. It was like a response towards a broken financial system, where people resonated with. And a lot of the people that have joined this space at that time, they still have the same kind of ideas. Now, I'm not saying Bitcoin maxis are always right. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion or favorite chain or coin. But you look at people like Michael Saylor, like the guy's been like with waving the Bitcoin flag for as long as I've known him, and it's fantastic, to see people with that unwavering faith in their protocols or the tools that they believe in.
Absolutely. And I kind of view Chronicle in the same way, right? Chronicle was, um, the reason that I started Chronicle was as a direct response to um, what I kind of saw in the Oracle landscape being completely inadequate, and saying like, no, like Chronicle can really raise like the industry standard here, right? That there's so many issues that I see. Like, for example, I think one of our core values is transparency. Um, I think there's this misconception in our industry that oracles are kind of like a fortune teller. That here's this smart
It's in the
contract.
name, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, here's the smart contract, and it gives you the data, and then off you go with that data, right? Um, but no one ever really stops to question, well, where did that data come from? How do I know that data is correct? And so um, with Chronicle, every we kind of have like this end to end like verifiability. So if you, for example, look up an oracle in our dashboard, um, for any price, the current price or any update that Oracle has done since the beginning of time. I think going back to like 2018, you can
Oh,
see
wow.
exactly which validator was which set of validators was involved in composing that price. You can even break it down one step further and see, why did this validator report that particular price or that particular piece of data? Like, where did it get that data from, right? And you can see, like, oh, well, this validator looked at Coinbase and it got this, and it looked at Kraken and it got this, looked at Binance and it got this, right? Looked at OKX and it got this, looked at Hobie. So you really have like this end-to-end kind of trace, and it's all cryptographically signed, right? So um, you can really verify the cryptographic digital signature in your browser to prove to yourself, right? Not having to trust the data that you're seeing, not having to trust the website, not having to trust Chronicle, right? But really prove to yourself that, like, yes, at this point in time, this is exactly what happened. And I think that kind of end-to-end verifiability and traceability, transparency, is really like something unique to Chronicle as an Oracle provider, that no one else really does. And I think is like the most true to the kind of crypto ethos of don't trust, verify.
Maybe is there anywhere that people can learn more about Chronicle dev and dev docs and anything like that?
Absolutely. So our Twitter is at Chronicle Labs. So follow us on there, to get all of the latest updates. I think the coolest thing to probably get up to speed with Chronicle is probably just checking out our dashboard. So at chroniclelabs.org/dashboard, you'll find all of the different oracles that we support on all the different chains, and you'll be able to do the exercise I talked about earlier, right? Like click on an price update and see like the exact validators and the exact sources and data that was used, and verify all of that information cryptographically. I think it's really fun to kind of play around with. And if you have any questions, or you just want to talk to the team, get to know us, come join our Discord at chat.chroniclelabs.org.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Nick, and thank you for the conversation. Thank you for explaining everything around Chronicle and oracles. I think it's a fantastic product, and I'm really looking forward to your guys' development of RWAs.
Yeah, really appreciate you having us on. This was super fun. Thank you.
Take care, man. Bye, everybody.